Coogs house, listen up.
I love the Houston love. Now, I'm not, I'm not seeing an Arizona State level leap to the Big 12 championship game, but as Parker Ainsworth remarked to me, why not? You can't.
We got him.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougars Daily Podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Patient makes first listen each and every day. You got Locked On Cougs is the everydayer that you are. If you want to join the conversation but you don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below. Are you into chips and queso or nachos these days? We're talking about chips here and championships and Big 12 championships here at Locked On Coogs today. Today's show is brought to you by a handful of folks we'll talk to you about more throughout Prize Picks, Drip Drop, Open Phone, all kinds of things. But I got to get into this first segment talking about why not Houston? Why not us? Right? We'll talk about that in the first segment. Second segment about some stuff going on around the conference, how the schedule actually is shaping up even better for the Cougs. Last but not least, I do want to talk about what the idea of success would mean for this season. And as Drake Toll would say, if you hit subscribe, we have to keep our jobs, which I guess is true. We are going to try and hit the 3,500 mark before the season starts in just 9 days away. 9 days from Houston Cougar football. And we've got other folks from the network saying this.
So the Houston inclusion, I just talked about this on a recent episode of my show. I love the Houston love. Now, I'm not, I'm not seeing an Arizona State level leap to the Big 12 championship game, but as Parker Ainsworth remarked to me, why not? You can't actually give me a good reason. You can't.
Wow.
I know, right?
Who
He said that. He said, why not? And I said, yeah, actually, I don't know why not. Like, I'm just trying to be reasonable in the craziest conference in the country. Yeah, I don't really know what. So like that's possible. I think Connor Wigman's solid. I think Willie Fritz is good. I think the roster has improved significantly from a year ago. Might take them a while to settle in with the transfers, but I think that Houston. I think Houston's worthy of being a top half team in the Big 12. I like Willie Fritz.
All right, that was Texas Tech at 1. They'll finish 11-2. BYU.
That was Spencer McLaughlin of Locked On College Football talking with Drake Toll, Locked On Big 12. They were talking about Drake's Locked On Big 12 official standings. And both of them were fairly high on the Cougars. Drake has Houston 7th in the conference to finish at 8-4. To be fair, there's kind of a huddle of teams there. You've got Tech, BYU, Utah, Kansas State, Arizona State, Baylor. That is the top 6 in some order for most people in America. So I want to act like he's super off there, but he has Houston at the next highest team, which is where things get to be interesting. Then obviously West Virginia behind them. I don't know so much about that, but then TCU, so on and so forth. And what's interesting about this for Houston and for us, I think, is it's raising this question. And I think it's interesting that colleagues of mine, admittedly, and I don't hate plugging a colleague when we agree or strongly vehemently disagree on things, but a colleague of mine says something I kind of agree with, and it's almost like we've been working together long enough. They're finally starting to see the light or something, right? But Houston has enough things going for it to be as surprising as anyone in this conference, and frankly, has the tools to be as successful as anyone in the most wide open conference in America. This is not a conference, a couple of bell cows or anything like that. Arizona State won it last year. Everyone talks about like, oh, they were the 16th seed in the preseason, but like that's cute, fine, and dandy. They were the 16th seed because they'd spent 2 seasons before that going 3 wins and 3 wins in a row. Houston's coming off back-to-back 4-win seasons. That continues to track. Now, everyone doubted a year ago that Drake Toll poll we just pulled up. A year ago, he had Houston winning just 1 singular game against Rice, actually, for whatever that's worth. And Houston ended up winning 3 conference games, right? After making a few changes to quarterback, having a top flight defense, they figured things out a little bit. Now, I do think it's interesting that people are, when they're not picking Houston to be in the 6-6, 7-5, 8-4 kind of range, they're saying there's not enough continuity at Houston. There's too many new players, too many new coordinators, and I think that's kind of bogus. If you look at last year's roster and say they weren't good enough, they went 4-8, they needed to do this, do that differently, then that would require changing the roster and the offensive coordinator and things like that. You can't say you changed too many things, but also admit that you weren't good enough a year ago. Those things don't make any sense to me. I like that my Locked On colleagues are at least seeing the light in that instance. The other thing about this is, while the defense may regress closer to the mean, and I'd say that they had an extremely strong year last year, I don't know that I'm going to say they go all the way back to the mean, but the offense is undoubtedly going to have improved. Last year, Houston lost 5 games where the opponent scored less than 28 points. Houston lost 3 games where the opponent scored less than 21 points. You fix that by bringing in 5 offensive linemen, a new quarterback that was a 5-star kid in high school, giving him a second chance. You bring in a new offensive coordinator, more firepower in Dean Connors and Amari Thomas and Harvey Broussard. You get the redshirt back in Kobe Young, firepower at the skill positions. You bring in the top tight end in the portal. I say America comes in as well. Suddenly, you're fixing that glaring issue. Look, I understand how Houston Cougar fans have been burnt several times, frankly, in the last 8 or 9 years, right? Even the 2021 season, as much fun as it was to win a bunch of games, there was kind of this lingering something's not quite right here thing about that team and season. And truthfully, I think ultimately I found out that that was because they played a really easy schedule, right? They won a lot of games, got the American Athletic Conference Championship game, but they had a really easy schedule in front of them. That helped a lot, right? Spoiler alert, a later segment, we'll talk about how this schedule is getting better by the day, but that'll be in segment 2. I do think, however, that even if you're that burned, scorned fan that has had trouble buying in for a while now, this program has offered tangible things to help you get back on the wagon, right? And it will be a bandwagon. When this thing is moving, we've seen the city of Houston get behind a winner. You don't believe me? Check out Astros attendance in 2014. You don't believe me? Go back and check out Rockets attendance when they had Western Conference finalists versus when they had 21 seasons. You don't believe, this city shows up for winners. Houston loves, if one team is not winning, people just focus their attention on someone who is. That's just the way the city goes, right? That's the way big cities go. It's not a problem when you're in, I'm not gonna throw it under the bus. It's not a problem when you're in the middle of nowhere and there's just one program around, right? You can always find a winner to latch onto and spend your money on them in Houston, right? I'm telling you, the Cougars are working towards that. They're making tangible steps towards that. We mentioned the turnover on offense. They also brought in some key linebackers and edge rushers, stuff like that on defense. Brought in a SEC defensive coordinator as well. And say what you say, I know that Florida fans are quick to be happy he was gone or whatever, but most if you pay attention to some of those SEC schools, everyone's the best thing is since sliced bread when they're there, and the worst thing since moldy breads when they left. But that's just kind of how the SEC fan bases roll. You got to take those kinds of things with a grain of salt. Typically, listen. I'm not guaranteeing. I'm not making some declaration that this team and program is Big 12 championship caliber or is going to do it for sure. It's championship. Nothing like that. It is still a rebuild. And while I think it's faster than I would have predicted, it is still a rebuilding project. However, the team and program under Willie Fritz in year 2 is in a place where it doesn't feel impossible. It doesn't feel like this out of the realm of possibility thing for Houston to go on a run, get to 9-3, and that to be on some tiebreaker kind of deal good enough. It doesn't feel like it's impossible for Houston to get hot, Wegman to be the real deal, and they go 10-2. None of those things feel impossible by any stretch. Now, is it more realistic that they go closer to 6-6, 7-5? Sure. Is it more realistic that you're still looking for answers and you're maybe not quite as far as you felt like you were in the rebuild? You got to have some gelling time or what? Sure. But in 2023, 2024, your first 2 seasons in the Big 12, I talked myself and I continue to talk myself into Houston winning every single week. I just, as a fan, tend to do that. By Friday, I'm like, okay, this is going to go right. This adjustment's going to work. The ball's going to bounce right here. This thing's going to shake out right. I talk myself into that every week. And this year, it doesn't feel like those things are as impossible as it did in 2023, 2024. And I think that's in and of itself an interesting place to find the program. Now, I want to talk some about how, honestly, the schedule is getting a little bit easier, unfortunately for some, fortunately for others, by the day. But before we get into that in the second segment, I do want to talk first about our buddies over at Prize Picks, because right now, this is the daily fantasy platform. All your football predictions get to turn into real rewards as we approach the first weekend with real, meaningful football games. Preseason's been heating up. College football is about to kick off. And whether you've got your eye on big name quarterbacks, breakout running backs, Prize Picks makes it easy to get in on the game. If you're into Joe Burrow, if he's running around for his life last night, if you're into CJ Stroud, if you're into Tank Dell and those Houston Texans, whatever the case may be, Prize Picks is simple to play. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6, anywhere in there. Player stat projections. Get your picks right. You could get cash and win up to 2,000 times your money. That almost doesn't even, it's crazy. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code Locked On College. Get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineups. Code Locked On College. Get $50 in prize lineups after you play your first $5 play. Prize Picks. Run your game. Today's show is also brought to you by your buddies over at Drip Drop. This is one I use all the time because if you're trying to stay on top of your routine, workouts, long days on campus, staying focused through back-to-back classes, the secret is hydration. Hydration is where it starts, and that's where Drip Drop comes in. Drip Drop is doctor-developed, scientifically proven for fast hydration. I got mine right here, actually. My energy, my mood, even my skin all feel better when I've got Drip Drop. It has the perfect balance of sodium, electrolytes, and glucose to help your body absorb fluids quickly, delivering 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of a leading sports drink. Right now, Drip Drop is offering Locked On listeners up to 20% off your first order. Head to dripdrop.com. Use code Locked On College. That's dripdrop.com. Promo code Locked On College for 20% off. Stock up now for that heat hits hard. Bar Andrews, Locked On Coogs here, in what might be the newsiest segment of the 3 today. Houston's schedule is getting easier through, admittedly, no doing of their own, and through some unfortunate circumstances. And I want to stress, I don't want to root. I don't want to root for kids to get hurt in college sports. That's certainly not the point. So in all of this, obviously, both to Texas Tech running back Quentin Joyner and his injury, and to Miami's, I guess actually it's Oklahoma State's Zaquan Patterson. I hope that all things, all get better soon. I don't mean to necessarily liken the two, because we don't know a whole lot about one, but Texas Tech did lose star running back Quentin Joyner with an injured ACL. I'm assuming it means tear, but I want to report, as it was said, injured ACL. USC transfer, top transfer overall as running back. And Texas Tech is down to just 3 running backs healthy on the roster now. And that's a big deal. We'll talk about in a second. Miami, in the same couple of hour span, dismissed top DB transfer Zaquan Patterson, just dismissed from the team. He had been a consistent player, rotational player as a freshman at Miami last season. Many ranked him as the top tackler in the freshman class last season, was his top 65 recruit of South Florida, the number 6 safety in his class as a high schooler, went to play for the hometown Miami Hurricanes, got to Oklahoma State in the transfer portal last offseason, and ultimately is now on his way somewhere else, right? And maybe somewhere else in the conference. I don't know. We won't see Quentin Joyner for at least another year. And then admittedly, it could take another week or two after that. You just never know in knee injuries and stuff. And that means that 2 opponents on Houston's schedules lost big name gets that made them seem like teams that would be good this season. Now, again, the biggest thing here is that Joyner should be getting healthy. I don't mean to get excited about him not being healthy. And whatever happened with Zaquan Patterson, if it's something that is a problem, I hope it gets fixed, right? However, I would point out that we know Texas Tech likes to play a lot of running backs. We also know that Oklahoma State lost a lot of games last year. Was hoping to have a big transfer portal class and get better. Mike Gundy called this class the first transfer portal class that he'd ever bought. Well, that buying of things has now led to dismissing his biggest get in many ways from the football team. At least his biggest defensive get is now no longer on the football team. Meanwhile, Texas Tech and the multiple running backs, right? Suddenly, the list of contenders at full strength Houston will have to play continues to dwindle. I don't know if you consider Colorado a contender or not. Some people are really high on the guys they brought in. Some people are not. But you get them on a Friday night, short week, in the Houston heat. They got to come down from the mountains. I think that's working Houston's favor. Suddenly, your next Big 12 opponent, Texas Tech, just lost a running back, and you get them at home as well. Next week, you're on the road to Oklahoma State. Listen, Oklahoma State did play in the Big 12 title game 2 years ago, but they were dead last the conference last year, and they just lost their biggest portal get. You get them again in mid-October. You still get 5 of your first 6 games in the city of Houston. You still get your Power 4 opponent as Oregon State, which feels kind of more like an in-between Power 4, Group of 5, Group of 6 opponent based on how things have unfolded with the Pac-12. Rest in peace, right? You still get Arizona State, and albeit not, it is a road game. It's not at home. That's your toughest team in terms of last year's win-loss percentage. They went 11-3 last year, but Arizona State also went 6-2 and 1 score games, lost their best player. Listen, sometimes there's going to be a regression to the means. Houston's schedule means they miss out on BYU, Utah, Kansas State. Pretty consensus, 3 of the top 5 teams in the conference. BYU, some people are shaky on with the quarterback question, but everyone understands that their defense and other parts of their offense are pretty strong there in Provo. Suddenly, okay, that's not as challenging. You miss out that half the conference, that portion of the conference. The portion you play is getting beat up a little bit. The schedule plays a key role here in how Houston is set up for success this season. Listen, this is not an even schedule compared to other teams. Utah, Kansas State, Iowa State, those schools have more challenging schedules than Houston, at least in terms of conference play. We'll see what the non-conference teams look like. Maybe Stephen of Boston's super deluxe good. We'll talk to somebody about that later this week, right? But overall, it does feel like Houston's getting a lot of breaks in this schedule. I mean, hey, frankly, it's why Drake Toll predicted them to go 8-4 in this ranking we open up the show talking about with, right? And with that being said, I do feel like you kind of gotta carpe diem a little bit, right? You got to seize the moment with this schedule because Joe McGuire is going to have to find someone to get another running back. Chris Level, Locked on Texas Tech. Chris and Casey are on a great show. Chris pointed out that he just feels like it's an inevitable that McGuire at Texas Tech is going to have to now move someone from slot or defensive back or safety, something to come play running back because it's too important to that offense to be able to run 2 running backs at the same time. You can't risk someone breaking a shoelace or whatever and suddenly start putting those things in jeopardy. And so he imagines they'll be moving someone. Well, if they move a slot, that means that they're now diminished at 2 spots. Suddenly things are snowballing a little bit, right? And listen, I hesitate to cheer others' demise, or certainly at their bad fortune. But I do think that as you're watching news unfold around the conference, things continue to break Houston's way. This is remarkable for the Cougs to get this kind of schedule and then to see, okay, but Houston does have to play Tech and Arizona State, and those are tough games. And suddenly, Tech's roster's getting dinged. Okay, but Oklahoma State, spent a lot of money in the transfer portal. Da, da, da. Oh, suddenly those guys might not get to stick around because they're not culture fits. Talking to Cody over at Locked on Oklahoma State, Cody Stovall, he was saying that, frankly, he didn't say exactly what happened with the exodus of Zaquan Patterson, but he mentioned things like culture like 5 or 6 times in a span of just a few minutes. I think it's safe to say that there's just not a mesh there between the two. And suddenly you wonder, okay, what's going on over there in Stillwater? Like by midseason, is a coach on the hot seat? Are things shaking up not so great? Like things are working. Things are working. Things are working. And so with things working, I want to talk in the last segment about what success could mean for Houston. What would success mean for the Cougs with this schedule? Before we get too far, I do want to remind you all that today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at OpenPhone. Now, if you're running a business, every missed call can be money left on the table. Think about the last time you needed a service. If the first person didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. You moved on. I know that's what we do. Some yard work, some stuff that I can't do on my own. I called someone, they didn't answer. I called the next one. That's why you need, and that's why they needed OpenPhone. You never miss an opportunity to connect with your customers. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system designed to streamline and scale your customer communications. You can, if you need to juggle 2 phone calls, keep business and personal separate, OpenPhone can help solve that instantly. The AI agent helps handle calls after hours, answers common questions, captures leads so you never miss a customer call again. That's why 60,000 businesses trust OpenPhone. They're offering Locked On listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/locked on college. OpenPhone, OpenPhone.com/locked on college. They'll even port over your existing number for free. OpenPhone, no missed calls, no missed customers. Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Coogs here. And we talked a lot about how things shaping up for the Cougs. Now, I like hearing that my Locked On brethren are buying in as well. But I want to address like what success would mean for this season. Where I guess the recording is about 10 days out, right? As the 18th, game's on the 28th. As we're recording, so you're hearing this 19th. We're less than 2 weeks out from the football season kicking off. And thinking about like what is successful for this season. And I would tell you, frankly, that a competitor, a competitive athlete, they're going to say they want to win every week. I mean, you might not set it out like we're going to win all 12 games in week 1, but every week you're going to try to go 1-0. I talk into a microphone, right? That's not what I have to do in this. But I totally get that that's going to be some people's mentality about what is successful. You didn't win that week. You're not successful that week. I get that. But as the guy that gets to talk to a microphone, this is not the basketball team I coach, right? I put down a couple bullet points that I think would make me feel like this was a successful year 2 in the rebuild under Willie Fritz. And the first this thing is, if you have listened to the show for a minute, you've heard me talk about how offenses need a thing. Under Slade Nagle, Houston's offense, to be successful, to consider the season a success, needs to develop that thing. Right now, some people are inside zone people, some people are power counter people, some people run mesh, some people run China routes. So whatever you do, you need to have a thing to say, hey, it's first down. We need positive play here. We're going to run zone read. Or we're going to run, like, we need a thing to do that we can fall back and hang our hat on. They did not have that last season. One of the many issues of the offense is they were just kind of throwing stuff at a wall and hoping it stuck to the bullseye. And this season, with Slade Nagle, his connection with Willie Fritz, and a strong quarterback room led by Connor Wegman and a better offensive line, I think that it's safe to say success for this team is going to require the offense to develop a thing or an identity. Now, with Nagle, I have my guess as to what it is. I think it's going to probably be, honestly, 21, and let's call it 12 personnel and some form of an off-tackle kind of play. That's what they did with cutback lanes when he was at Tulane, but we'll see what happens. I do think, though, they need to have that thing. A defensive deal is, listen, I understand that the defense may not repeat exactly the level of success they had a year ago. Sometimes the ball breaks your way. Defense is probably defense definitely is more erratic from year to year as far as like the movements and changes, because sometimes the ball does not go your way, right? I will say though that for the season to be a success, the defense needs to be strong enough to prove last year was not a fluke, right? Last year was not a right place, right time kind of combination of talent. Last year was not a hey, we know they're going to run because they don't have to pass. Right? Last year they need to prove this year on defense, be good enough this year on defense to prove that last year was not a fluke. Now, if they're in the top 25 again on defense, that'd be sick, right? But if they're better than average, if they're respectable, if they're helping Houston win games, that is a markedly it means it's successful, because it means that last year is not just some random thing. This is part of the Fritz identity and rebuilding the culture, right? That's why they need that to be successful. Along the same lines, no blowouts, no blanks. Last year, you had 3 different games without an offensive touchdown. You had just 1 touchdown against the UNLV, just 10 points against Baylor, 12 against Oklahoma. Actually, you had 4 games without offensive touchdown, because the touchdown against Baylor was a defensive touchdown. Ultimately, what you need this season is to be in the game. You're not down 20-0, not down 34-7, right? Like, your offense, defense complementing each other needs to keep you in games. Give yourself chances to win. Trust the culture Fritz is building. You'll find yourself like you did against Kansas State and Utah last season on the right side of these things more often than not. Keep yourself. That means keep yourself in the game, means keep yourself in the game on offense, keep yourself in the game on defense. But last year, the blanks, the blowouts, you never gave yourself a chance in half a dozen games, right? And so part of that's the offense, admittedly, but it's also special teams, not muffing a punt here, Norman, Oklahoma, or whatever, right? Like, you got to make sure you're doing things that help keep yourself in the game. No blowouts, no blanks. Get this thing back to being Houston Cougar football. Last but not least, I don't mean to put a win-loss total on it. A successful season this season feels like a bowl game. And I mean that to say that that should feel like a floor expectation. I understand that when we get to the end of the season, we might think, oh, we let 1 or 2 get away and we still made a bowl game. Maybe we should have been 7-5, 8-4, whatever. And again, the players, if you ask them, are going to say we need to go 1-0 every week, right? Totally get that. But from a macro level, if Willie Fritz comes in and with a skeleton of a roster left to him, he goes 4-8. The next year, they go 6-6 or better, make a bowl. And he brings in the caliber of recruiting class he's bringing in, Henderson and everybody, right? Suddenly, things continue to grow, right? You can show, with proof of concept that things are getting better year to year, right? Especially when, let's admit it, your schedule this year is in your favor. It's not that it's an easy schedule relative to like playing in the Timbuktu conference or whatever, but it is not as difficult as it could have been. You need to take advantage, and you need to win some games, put yourself in a bowl. And frankly, from a program development standpoint, putting yourself in a bowl means you get an extra few weeks of practice at the end of the year. And with the young guys who'll be on the team the next season, you get to prove it to them by giving them the reps of practice, giving them bowl games, get them some work, get them some extra coaching. All of those things build into successful programs, right? It's the reason I would argue to play in week 0. You get an extra bit of practice, you get to start earlier. That's the way that goes. And I think that is a big, big deal. Speaking of week 0, last episode's trivia question was about a rumored week 0 matchup with Michigan State that was supposed to be this weekend. I believe there was one report. I think it was Go Coogs that said it should even been in Dublin, Ireland. I fully trust them. I just hadn't heard anyone else say that. That would have only been the second time, had it happened, that Houston and Michigan State matched up. The question last episode was, when was the first matchup? What was the score? Houston won in 1967, 37-7, and the only other matchup with Michigan State back then. Now, Michigan State was coming off a couple of pretty strong years before that one, and the Houston Cougars showed them who's boss. Now, today's trivia question, answer the comments down below. We'll answer it next episode. How many different head coaches has the Houston Cougar football program had? Repeat, how many different head coaches has the Houston Cougar football program had? Thank you all so much for tuning in today to Locked On Cougs, proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Coogs.